The alien ships came without warning. They emerged from the sky like a black storm, blotting out the sun. Their arrival was so sudden that no one had time to react before the first wave of destruction hit the cities below. Massive beams of energy rained down on Earth's surface, reducing skyscrapers to rubble in seconds. It was chaos. Entire metropolises were erased from existence. In a blink of an eye, people screamed in terror, running for their lives only to be caught by the invaders who tore through the streets with cold precision. There were no demands, no threats, just relentless destruction. The aliens had no interest in negotiating. They were here to conquer, and they would stop at nothing to achieve their goal. In the blink of an eye, humanity was rendered powerless, and the world watched helplessly as its fate was sealed. But there were still pockets of resistance scattered across the planet, survivors who refused to give in to the alien onslaught. These groups were small and disorganized, but they were determined to fight back. Amid the destruction, a small group of soldiers and civilians banded together in the ruins of an old military base. They were led by a former army commander named Elena Valdez, a woman whose quiet determination had inspired those around her even when it seemed like all hope was lost. She had spent years training soldiers and preparing for a war that had never come until now. The base had been abandoned for years, but it was still fortified, and the survivors used it as a makeshift headquarters, planning their next move. It was here that the first glimmer of resistance began to take shape. As alien forces moved deeper into the city, the survivors began to use their knowledge of the terrain to strike back in small but meaningful ways. They didn't have the firepower or the technology to defeat the aliens head-on, but they had something the invaders didn't understand: the ability to adapt quickly and to think like they had nothing left to lose. The aliens were too confident in their power, and they underestimated humanity's resilience. Elena and her group of survivors struck in the dark of night, targeting supply lines, sabotaging alien communications, and planting traps in the streets for the alien soldiers. Their attacks were small but effective, and they sent a clear message to the invaders: they had not conquered Earth. Yet as news of these attacks spread across the globe, other survivors began to rally together. As well, they shared intelligence on alien weaknesses and coordinated guerrilla strikes against the invaders from all corners of the world. Humanity's fight back had begun. But it wasn't just the soldiers and civilians fighting back. Scientists and engineers began to play a crucial role as well, working around the clock to develop new weapons and devices using scraps of alien technology they had scavenged from the battlefield. The invaders had made one fatal mistake: they had underestimated humanity's ability to adapt to its environment and to innovate when the stakes were high. The aliens might have come to Earth with superior firepower, but they had no idea that human ingenuity would be their undoing. The resistance was small, but it was growing, and with each passing day it became clear that humanity was not going to go down without a fight. As the weeks passed, the resistance grew stronger despite the overwhelming odds. Elena and her group worked tirelessly to recruit more survivors from the ruins of the cities. Some came from military backgrounds, others were doctors, engineers, and even former criminals. But they all shared one thing in common: they refused to let their world fall to the invaders. With each new member, the resistance became a more cohesive unit. They shared skills, knowledge, and a common goal: to take back Earth from the alien menace. The survivors knew they were fighting a war of attrition against an enemy that seemed invincible, but they also knew that every small victory mattered. Each successful strike against the aliens, no matter how minor it seemed, sent a message that humanity wasn't done yet. It wasn't long before the aliens began to notice their losses. The first signs of frustration appeared when one of their high-ranking officers was assassinated during a covert strike. The invaders had grown so used to winning that they didn't know how to handle defeat at the hands of a species they had considered inferior. The resistance capitalized on this moment of alien weakness by launching bolder attacks on their supply chains and infrastructure. They didn't have the weapons to defeat the invaders in open combat, but they had the element of surprise and the ability to strike where it hurt most. Their attacks were swift and calculated, designed to disrupt the aliens' operations and slow their advance. But it was never enough to turn the tide of war alone. What humanity needed now was something the invaders couldn't foresee: a breakthrough that would give them the upper hand. In the midst of these hit-and-run attacks, a small team of engineers and scientists discovered something strange. A piece of alien technology, recovered from the wreckage of a destroyed ship, seemed to function differently from anything they had encountered before. Its design was unlike anything they had ever seen, but its power source was unmistakably similar to human-made technology. It didn't take long for the engineers to realize that the invaders weren't using some far-off technology, as they had assumed. Instead, they had been tinkering with something that had been created long before their arrival, something that could be manipulated and harnessed with the right knowledge. As the discovery began to spread through the ranks of the resistance, the mood shifted from mere survival to hope. Humanity's ingenuity had found a way to weaponize alien technology, and with it came the possibility of turning the tide of war against the invaders. It wasn't just about surviving anymore, it was about fighting back with a new form of power, one that had been in front of them all along, but had been hidden beneath layers of alien secrecy. Alina and her team worked around the clock to reverse engineer the alien device and integrate it with human technology. The first few attempts were disastrous as they tried to make sense of the alien schematics, but with each failure they learned something new. Their persistence paid off when they managed to create a prototype weapon that could disrupt the aliens' advanced shields. It was only a small victory, but it was enough to make the invaders take notice. Their confidence began to waver as they realized that the humans were not just fighting back, they were beginning to understand their technology and adapt faster than the invaders had ever anticipated. As the first successful test of the alien disruptor weapon was carried out, the resistance couldn't believe their eyes. The device worked. The alien shields that had once been impenetrable flickered and failed under the pressure of the human-made technology. The engineers and scientists who had spent countless hours tinkering with the alien device celebrated the small victory, but they knew that this was just the beginning. Their success meant they now had a way to breach the invaders' defenses and strike at their most vulnerable targets. Alina was quick to recognize the significance of this breakthrough. Now the resistance had a real chance to fight back in a way that wasn't just about survival. It was about taking the fight to the invaders and making them pay for their arrogance. The pressure to act quickly was immense, because the aliens were beginning to tighten their grip on Earth, and their reinforcements were coming in waves. Humanity needed to act fast, or risk being overwhelmed once again. The resistance mobilized immediately. The new disruptor weapons were distributed to the frontline fighters, and small teams of specialized operatives were trained to infiltrate alien-controlled zones and sabotage key installations. With their newfound weaponry, they struck at alien power plants, supply depots, and communication hubs, crippling the invaders' ability to respond swiftly. Each strike hit harder than the last, and the alien forces started to feel the pressure for the first time since their arrival. What shocked the invaders the most wasn't just the technology humanity had adapted to their own use, it was the manner in which they used it. The humans had taken a page from their own playbook and began to employ unorthodox tactics that baffled the alien commanders. Guerrilla warfare had become the new norm. Surprise attacks, ambushes, and sabotage had replaced traditional confrontations. Humanity had no intention of fighting the invaders on their terms. Instead, it forced the aliens into a prolonged battle of attrition where they had no advantage and were forced to fight a war of endurance. Alien commanders began to grow uneasy as their once perfect operations unraveled before their eyes. They had been overconfident in their ability to crush humanity and had underestimated the lengths humans were willing to go to in order to protect their world. They had thought of humans as weak and predictable, but now they were discovering just how resourceful and tenacious the human race truly was. The aliens' arrogance had blinded them to the truth. They had underestimated a species that could bend and shape itself to survive any adversity. Meanwhile, the resistance continued to improve their tactics. With each victory, they gained valuable intelligence on the aliens' weaknesses. Their next move would be the most dangerous yet, a direct assault on one of the invaders' largest strongholds hidden deep within the heart of a city that had been completely overtaken by the aliens. The Resistance's plan was to strike at the heart of their operation, disable their most powerful weapons, and take back a critical stronghold from the invaders' grasp. It was a high-risk move, but the Resistance knew they had no choice. They had to take this opportunity or risk losing the momentum they had gained. As the teams prepared for the assault, Elena gathered her people for one final briefing. Her voice was steady, but filled with the resolve of someone who had seen humanity pushed to the edge and refused to let it fall into darkness. She told them this was their moment to change the course of the war forever. They weren't just fighting for survival anymore. They were fighting for a future where humanity could take back its world and ensure that the invaders would never return again. The night before the assault on the alien stronghold was filled with tension. The resistance fighters gathered in their makeshift war room under the flickering light of salvaged lamps. Each person was lost in their own thoughts as they prepared for what was about to come. There was no room for doubt. Not now, not after everything humanity had been through. They had learned the hard way that hesitation could mean death. The only thing that mattered was completing the mission, no matter the cost. Elena stood at the front of the room, her eyes scanning the faces of the men and women who had come together to fight a war they never expected to face. She had led them through the worst of it, but now the pressure felt heavier than ever. This was a turning point. They could either break the alien hold on Earth or face the very real possibility of losing everything they had fought for. Her voice was firm. As she outlined the final steps of the plan, the resistance would split into small teams, each tasked with infiltrating different sections of the stronghold and planting explosives to cripple the aliens' central power grid. The goal was simple: disable their weapon systems and communication hubs, then get out before the entire complex could go into lockdown. They knew the risks. The alien stronghold was heavily fortified and surrounded by elite security forces. There was no guarantee they would all make it out alive, but humanity had learned to face the impossible, and the resistance had come to understand that sometimes the greatest victories were the ones achieved against all odds. As the teams moved into position under the cover of night, they were all acutely aware of the one thing that had kept them going this far: the unshakable belief that they could win if they fought smart, if they used their enemies' overconfidence against them. The assault began at dawn with a series of coordinated strikes. All over the stronghold, the resistance moved with lethal precision, using the alien disruptor weapons to disable key defenses and create openings for the infiltration teams. Explosions rocked the facility as planned, and the alien forces scrambled to respond. But it was too late. The humans had anticipated their every move. The resistance fighters moved quickly and silently, planting their charges and then retreating before the aliens had a chance to retaliate. Inside the complex, things got even more chaotic. The aliens were in full panic mode, and their response was clumsy and disorganized. The resistance knew they had little time before the aliens could regroup and retaliate with full force. But they pushed forward regardless. Their mission was too important to fail now. With every step they took, they were weakening the invaders' hold on Earth, and it felt like the tide of the war was slowly beginning to turn as Elena's team reached the final objective, a key communications relay deep within the stronghold. She couldn't help but feel the weight of the moment. They were so close to victory. She could taste it. She glanced at her team members, their faces grim but resolute. There was no turning back now. They'd moved into position to plant the final explosive when suddenly the alarms went off. The aliens had anticipated their move and had set a trap. The room was filled with a blinding light as alien reinforcements poured in from every direction. Elena's heart raced as she realized that they were about to be overwhelmed. But just as the aliens closed in, something unexpected happened. One of the resistance engineers activated a backup weapon. The last line of defense humanity had created a makeshift EMP blast that disabled the remaining alien tech in the area, throwing the invaders into chaos just long enough for the team to finish planting the charges and escape. They didn't have much time, but they had completed their mission. Now it was time to get out before the entire stronghold went up in flames. As the explosion ripped through the stronghold, the shockwave echoed for miles. The blast was followed by a deafening silence as the resistance fighters scrambled to regroup. Their hearts were pounding in their chests. The mission had been a success, but the cost was heavy. Elena's team barely managed to escape the wreckage of the stronghold before the alien forces locked down the area. Their plans were disrupted, but the aliens weren't ready to give up just yet. The momentary chaos caused by the EMP and the explosion had given the humans a critical window, but they knew it wouldn't last long. They had done it. They had crippled the alien power grid, and taken out their communication systems, but the victory felt fragile, like a single thread in a storm of uncertainty. The aliens would retaliate with everything they had left, and humanity had to be ready to face it or risk being crushed under the weight of their own success. As Alina's team made their way through the ruins, they could hear the distant rumble of alien reinforcements approaching. The resistance had to move quickly to avoid being surrounded and trapped in the alien-controlled sector. Despite the chaos, the resistance fighters were energized by the success of their operation. They had delivered a blow to the invaders that would make them rethink their plans. It wasn't just about holding on anymore. Humanity had proven that they could strike back with deadly efficiency, and that the invaders weren't as untouchable as they had once believed. But the battle was far from over. The aliens would learn from their mistakes and adapt, just as humanity had done. Their arrogance had been their undoing, but that arrogance would soon turn into a deadly resolve. The invaders were not going to simply retreat into the stars. They would retaliate with full force. Back at their new base, the resistance leaders gathered to assess the damage. The stronghold's destruction had given them a foothold in the war, but they couldn't afford to waste time celebrating. They knew that the alien response would come quickly, and they needed to be prepared for the next wave of attacks. Humanity had struck at the heart of the invaders' operations, but now the fight was about to shift into a much more dangerous phase. The aliens had suffered a humiliating defeat, but they were far from broken. They would adapt and counterattack with everything they had. Alina sat with her commanders, going over their next moves. Their limited resources were being stretched thin, and the pressure was mounting. The alien forces were still massive, and their technology was beyond anything humanity had encountered. But the humans had learned from their mistakes. They were no longer playing defense. They were on the offensive now, and every move they made mattered. The first real taste of victory had been earned through ingenuity and grit, but that wouldn't be enough to secure humanity's future. They would need to push further, take the fight to the invaders' home turf, and deliver the final blow. Alina looked around at the faces of the people who had fought beside her. They were tired, but they had found something they hadn't had before, a sense of purpose and unity. They were no longer just survivors, they were warriors, and they would keep fighting until they had reclaimed their world. She took a deep breath and said the words that everyone was thinking: it's time to go on the attack. They didn't know exactly how they would win, but they knew one thing for certain: humanity would not give up their world without a fight. The decision to go on the attack was not made lightly, but the resistance knew it was their best chance at turning the war in their favor. After weeks of raids and small victories, they had learned the alien forces' patterns and vulnerabilities, and now it was time to capitalize on that knowledge. The alien response had been swift, but not as coordinated as they had expected. Cracks were beginning to form in their once impenetrable structure. Humanity's unexpected ability to adapt was beginning to wear down the invaders' confidence. The first wave of their counteroffensive would target an alien fleet that was responsible for maintaining control over vast areas of the planet's skies. The fleet was one of their strongest formations, and its destruction would cripple the invaders' ability to reinforce their ground forces. Alina's team worked tirelessly with the Resistance's top strategists to design an assault that would take the aliens by surprise. They used the same guerrilla tactics that had served them well before. This time, however, the humans were taking a much greater risk. They were going in deeper than ever before and into the heart of alien territory. The night before the assault, the base was filled with tension. Alina walked through the hallways, checking in with her team, making sure everything was in place. She felt the weight of their dependence on her. Each decision she made could mean life or death for them all, but she could see the resolve in their eyes, the same fire that had kept them fighting for so long. They were ready to do whatever it took to win, and Alina knew they could not afford to hesitate now. As the operation began, the resistance fighters moved with precision. The element of surprise was on their side as they infiltrated the alien fleet's outer defenses using stolen alien technology to disable sensors and communication networks. They fought in the shadows, striking quickly and silently, disabling the enemy ships one by one. But it wasn't long before the aliens realized they were under attack. Their ships scrambled to respond, but they were too disorganized. The humans had anticipated the chaos their sabotage had caused and used it to their advantage. Just as the alien fleet attempted to regroup, the resistance fighters launched their final assault. They hit the heart of the fleet with everything they had. Their own fleet of repurposed alien ships fired on the unsuspecting invaders from all angles, throwing the enemy into disarray. Explosions lit up the night sky as the invader ships were torn apart by the sheer force of the human attack. But the battle was far from over. The aliens fought back with all their might, launching counterattacks and reinforcing their position. Elena's team was deep in the thick of it when an unexpected development occurred. One of the resistance ships was struck directly by an alien missile, sending it spiraling toward the planet's surface. The ship's captain and several crew members were lost in the explosion. It was a devastating blow, but it also served as a reminder of the stakes at hand. Humanity wasn't just fighting for survival. They were fighting for a future where they could live free from the alien threat. Despite the loss, the resistance pressed on their resolve. Stronger than ever, they used the chaos to their advantage, launching a final coordinated strike that crippled the alien fleet's command ship, the heart of their operation. With the command ship destroyed, the remaining invader ships fell into disarray. Without their leadership, the fleet was no longer a threat, and the resistance had dealt a crippling blow to the aliens' control of the skies. Humanity had once again shown that it could stand against an overwhelmingly superior force, and when the alien forces were on the back foot. But the war was far from over now. The humans had their victory, but they knew the hardest part was still to come. The aliens would come for revenge, and humanity would be ready. The destruction of the alien fleet was a turning point, but it did not mark the end of the war. Instead, it sparked a new chapter. The invaders were reeling from the loss of their most powerful assets, but their pride was unshaken. They had suffered a blow, but they were far from defeated. In the days that followed, Elena and her team could see the alien forces regrouping. They were determined to retaliate, and the humans knew that the counterattack would be swift and merciless. The alien commanders were now fully aware of the human capability to adapt and strike from the shadows, and they would not make the same mistake again. The resistance used the brief moment of respite to regroup and plan their next moves. They were riding high on the momentum of their victory, but they knew they couldn't afford to become complacent. The next wave of alien retaliation was already on the horizon. The invaders had begun to deploy reinforcements from distant sectors of the galaxy, and these forces were unlike anything the resistance had faced before. The aliens had learned from their earlier mistakes, and they were now adapting to the unpredictable tactics that the humans had relied on. Elena gathered her leaders together in the aftermath of the battle, the weight of the responsibility pressing down on her. As she looked around the room, the survivors who had fought beside her were tired, but they were also resolute. They had seen their world shattered and their lives torn apart, but they had not given up. They had endured, and now they were more united than ever. The decision that lay ahead would determine the fate of humanity. The resistance could not continue to play catch-up. They had to strike again, and they had to strike first. There was no longer any question of retreat. The war had become one of attrition, a battle of wills, where the first side to break would lose everything. Humanity had already given so much, but they would have to give even more if they were to win this fight. The resistance would need to launch a series of preemptive strikes against key alien bases across the globe, disabling their remaining defenses and preventing their reinforcements from reaching Earth. The plan was dangerous, but it was humanity's best shot at crippling the invaders before they could reorganize and retaliate. Elena's strategy was simple but bold: divide and conquer. By targeting the alien command centers and communication hubs across different continents, the resistance could scatter the invaders' forces and prevent them from coordinating a full-scale assault. The human-made disruptors would play a central role in this plan. The weapon's ability to disable alien shields and technology had already proven invaluable, and now it would become their greatest asset. But even with their newfound advantage, Elena knew that the operation would be perilous. The aliens would not let these attacks go unpunished. The days before the operation were filled with planning and preparation. The resistance fighters trained for the worst possible outcomes. Every scenario was considered, every escape route mapped out. They knew they would be outnumbered and outgunned, but they had one thing the aliens could not replicate: their unity, their resolve, and their unrelenting drive to reclaim their world. The countdown to the operation had begun, And as the resistance prepared for what could be their final stand, Alina found herself standing alone for a moment, reflecting on everything that had led them here, the destruction, the losses, and the lives that depended on their success. She clenched her fists and whispered to herself, "We won't stop until we've taken back everything." The final operation began under the cover of darkness as resistance fighters scattered across the globe. Each team was assigned a different target from the alien command centers to their weapon storage facilities. The objective was clear, and the stakes were higher than ever. The aliens had made it painfully clear that they would stop at nothing to maintain their grip on Earth. But humanity wasn't backing down this time. Every step was a calculated risk, and the pressure weighed heavily on the fighters' shoulders. But there was no turning back now. The resistance was committed to the fight, and they would push until they couldn't push any longer. Alina and her team made their way toward the first target, a heavily fortified alien communications hub, located deep in the heart of a once thriving metropolis. It was a key component of the invaders' infrastructure, and disabling it would significantly hinder their ability to coordinate their forces. The air was thick with tension as they approached the site, the weight of the mission pressing down on them. The plan was simple: infiltrate, destroy, and escape. The enemy forces were spread thin, but the alien response was swift. Once they realized they were under attack, it was only a matter of time before reinforcements would arrive, and that was when the real danger would begin. The team moved quickly, using the alien disruptors to disable the outer defenses, and then planting explosives in key areas of the facility. The silence of the night was shattered by the sounds of distant explosions as the resistance fighters executed their strategy with ruthless efficiency. But just as they had anticipated, the aliens began to react. Their soldiers flooded into the streets, forcing the resistance to move faster than planned. But even as the aliens scrambled to respond, the humans kept moving forward without hesitation, knowing that every second counted. Inside the facility, Alina's team encountered a new challenge. The alien forces were much more organized than they had been in previous encounters. They seemed to anticipate the resistance's every move. Despite their best efforts, the resistance found themselves caught in a deadly standoff with a unit of elite alien soldiers. The air was thick with gunfire and the crackling energy of alien weapons as both sides fought desperately to maintain control over the battlefield. But the humans weren't backing down. Their resolve was stronger than ever, and they pushed forward, knowing that they had no other choice but to win. With the communications hub destroyed, Alina's team barely managed to escape before the facility collapsed in a fiery explosion. As they made their way to the extraction point, their hearts pounded in their chests. But they knew the fight wasn't over, not yet. The aliens were regrouping, and the retaliation would come soon. But for the first time in a long while, humanity had the upper hand. The resistance had struck a decisive blow, and the invaders were beginning to falter. Their confidence was shaken, and that was all the humans needed. The war was not won in that moment, but the resistance had set a new course. They had proven that humanity could not only survive, but also fight back with strength and unity. They had shown the invaders that Earth was not theirs to take, that humanity was a force to be reckoned with. As Alina looked out at the horizon, she knew that the journey ahead would be long and difficult, but she also knew that humanity would keep fighting. They had already shown their enemies that they would not surrender, they would not yield, and no matter how dark the future seemed, they would never stop fighting for their world, for their home.